Welcome to the Buddha Valley Life podcast. This month we are covering autoimmunity, understanding autoimmune disease, and specifically as well the major connection between gut health and trauma. So I'm Coach Britt, founder of the Holistic Wellness Coaching Academy, School for Gut Health, and Buddha Valley Life platform for holistic gut restoration, coach services, and this podcast, as well as the author of Buddha Belly, the mind, body, soul approach to health, starting with your gut. And if you know me, you know that mental health is my passion, brain function, brain and behavior, because it's literally our life. And so it's really fascinating to me. And autoimmune disease, you guys, is the number one largest disease affecting industrialized nations. And the only reason it doesn't show up that way is because they compartmentalize autoimmune conditions. Autoimmunity is considered a disease, but different autoimmune conditions are considered different diseases, even though in my opinion they're the same one. They're a state of the body. They're a state of the body attacking its own tissues. An overactive immune response to it within the body and causing the signals to get crossed in the body to attack its own tissues, mistaking them for a threat. So in a thyroid condition, you got an autoimmune thyroid, you're going to have the body attacking the thyroid gland, and you're going to have, vasculitis, it's the body attacking blood vessels, and arthritis is the body attacking, joint tissues and things like this, okay? So type 1 diabetes, okay, the pancreas. So autoimmunity altogether is the leading disease, and it is highly correlated to inflammation. And we know inflammation comes back to the gut. Autoimmunity is absolutely connected to the gut. The gut has basically the say in an autoimmune state of the body. It is going to be the epicenter where everything starts to go awry, and it is going to be what's conducting the immune system. And so when the gut conducts poorly, guess what? The immune system gets confused, and it starts attacking its own tissues. And there is, with everything, a mental and emotional, spiritual component to these things. So much like the gut affects the brain affects the gut. So we are going to also talk about the high incidences of trauma in individuals with autoimmune conditions and what we can learn from this and what we can do about it. So what we're going to cover today is really the definition of autoimmunity, what causes it, and the gut microbiome's role in this whole situation, as well as the impact of trauma. So the definition of autoimmunity is when the immune system mistakenly attacks the body's own tissues. So examples like I gave you guys: rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, multiple sclerosis, type 1 diabetes. And the mechanisms of this autoimmune response is the immune system typically distinguishes between self and non-self cells. So in an autoimmune state, this distinction fails, leading to an immune response against self-antigens. It's unfortunate. And common symptoms are things like fatigue, joint pain, skin problems, recurring fever, swollen glands, and you'll see brain components too. You'll see a lot of mental health. That's one thing with autoimmune. You'll also see anxiety, depression, lack of focus, brain fog, things like that. Because when the gut is out of whack, it absolutely affects the brain. Inflammation in the body that's leading to that is going to affect the brain as well. Causes: there's genetic factors. Certain genes can predispose individuals to autoimmune diseases. Family history plays a significant role. And I will say that while genetics are important, they're not necessarily what waters the seeds. They're just the seeds that are planted. So we are living in a day and age where we're providing such an environmental support system for disease that it's watering the seeds that we bring with us genetically. And then if we're not doing something about that, we're not changing our genes via our lifestyle factors in our gut health, which we can do. It's called epigenetics. We can pass on different genes to our children than those that were passed on to us. And we can eradicate certain types of diseases in our gene pool that may have been really constant in family members prior to us, we can actually change the trajectory of this. But if we don't do those things, then we just continue to pass them on through family, and the same thing continues. The environment can then trigger these infections, viruses, diet, exposure to chemicals or toxins, hormone factors. So some autoimmune diseases are more common in women, suggesting a hormonal link. Well, guess what? What we know about the gut is that the gut orchestrates both hormones and immune system. So of course, if there's dysregulation in immune system function via the gut being in a dysbiotic state, out of whack, then there's going to be some funky stuff going on with the hormones too, and it just makes sense. So the gut, so if you guys aren't familiar totally with the gut microbiome consists of trillions of microorganisms living in our intestines. It's mainly our large colon. It plays a crucial role in digestion, in immune function, and overall health. But the gut immune system interaction is intricate. The gut contains a large portion of the body's immune cells, and healthy gut flora helps in the proper functioning of immune systems. So these bacteria, different bacteria do different things, and some orchestrate and communicate with the immune response in the body. So when these bacteria are in proper ratios and they're well taken care of, then they're good orchestrators. When this doesn't happen, like anything, they become poor. Their interactions become poor. There's confusion, and this is what sets us up for failure with autoimmune. So dysbiosis is the imbalance in the gut microbiome. More gram-negative bacteria than positive. The wrong ratio, lack of diversity in the ecosystem. Okay, think rainforest and all the creatures that live in it and how they're all interconnected. That's your gut microbiome. So when there's decimation, we're going to see the ecosystem thrown off. And dysbiosis can lead to increased intestinal permeability, which is a leaky gut, when your gut starts allowing antigens to enter the bloodstream and trigger an autoimmune response. The bloodstream is supposed to remain sterile. So when the bloodstream's seeing these antigens, it's going to send its fighters. Okay, and so that's going to be inflammation, intentional inflammation. That's what inflammation's for. But when this is a constant state due to leaky gut, we're seeing chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation, remember, is present in every single kind of disease. So the research indicates that individuals with autoimmune disease often have altered gut microbiomes. Certain probiotics and prebiotics have been shown to help restore gut balance. But one thing we want to talk about, so if we can really understand autoimmunity in that sense, we get it. Stuff messes with our guts. We have stress in general is going to destroy our gut microbiome or better it, lack of overwhelming stress. And stress comes in the forms of multiple exposures, environmental toxins, all those body products and chemicals. The average person's putting 126 different chemicals on their body a day. This will confuse the immune system because when it sees a chemical, it's going to put out its fighters. It's going to put the body into a state of inflammation. And it's going to do it because of the lotion you use today and the cosmetics and the perfume and all that stuff, right? This is just one of the ways. Then we've got this stuff in our food, okay? Even in whole food, if we're eating food that's drenched with pesticides or GMO, okay, where it's built into it, then our gut is under attack. And it's going to sense it's going to sense these foreign things. It's going to sense these threats, and it's going to send its fighters to attack it. And that's not even covering if we're eating food like substances that also has obviously lots of preservatives and colors and all that stuff that's going to set off the immune system, but it's not nutrient dense. So it's not even feeding the gut right. These are the ways that a lot of that stuff plays into wrecking our gut microbiome. And depending on what gut microbiome you got when you were born from your mom and what was cultivated through early life, were you breastfed or not? Were you on antibiotics, especially before the age of 2? Was your gut recultivated? I mean, did you grow up around dirt and pets? Or did you grow up in squeaky clean environments where everything was antibacterialized? Okay, this is going to affect. Were you on lots of medications as a kid? I mean, all these things are going to play a factor in the gut that you're working with and how resilient it is and how vulnerable it may be. So that's why you'll see maybe you get a virus and all of a sudden you've got stuff going on that's likely an autoimmune condition. Like we saw this with COVID. We saw a lot of people get what they call long COVID, but what a lot of us have seen in the functional medicine arena is that this wasn't necessarily long COVID, which doesn't describe a darn thing, mind you. But it was that COVID was such a harsh virus. It set off awaiting autoimmune responses and states of people's bodies. And that's why it can look different for different people. But you'll see a lot of common threads. You'll see a lot of joint pain, migraines, fatigue, chronic fatigue, nausea, maybe even direct gut issues and things like that, because the body just took on a major stress and was not resilient enough to bounce back enough from it. And so it gave in to its predispositions, which is usually a form of autoimmunity. So this is how this is happening. And so we understand, hopefully you guys understand at least enough of how the bacteria ecosystem in our gut is supposed to be, and how it gets wrecked and what is wrecking it, and that when it is wrecked, it's causing chronic inflammation and a confused immune system response. This confused immune system response is causing the body to then tell its immune system to attack its own tissues, and that's where we see this problem. But one area that's important too is the role of trauma. Trauma refers to severe emotional, physical, or psychological stress. How trauma affects the immune system. Chronic stress and trauma can lead to complete dysregulation of the immune system because it can affect the gut. And stress hormones like cortisol can alter immune responses, potentially triggering or exacerbating autoimmune conditions. So that's where if we see chronic stress, like chronic cortisol being shot, it'll throw off the ecosystem. We need it. We need it when we need it, but we don't need it all the time. We don't want it all the time, or else there's dysfunction. And chronic stress, when the body is in a state of chronic stress, sometimes it could be just you really hate your job and you're dreading it every day and it's very chronic, or it could be highly traumatic incidences that are traumatic to you. Unresolved trauma from early life can be a thing too, because if we're not finding ways to healthily heal and cope from those traumas and come into our own healthy self and exercise healthy boundaries and communication and seek the right therapies and things, then we can almost be re-traumatized on a chronic basis because we haven't dealt with that. So we're in different situations and we're perceiving the whole world as a threat because of something from our past. And this can just be re-traumatizing the body. And aside from, that's just a brief on some of the psychological examples of how some of these things happen. But the physiological piece is that when the body's in a state of fight or flight, which we may not even realize it because maybe we live so much like this, a lot of us do, rushed, or dealing with trauma that's followed us our whole life, so fear, angst, and it's just kind of our norm. But when the body gets like that, it prioritizes cardiovascular functions. So it prioritizes pumping blood and all that, and the heart, so that you can essentially run from the threat. And so this is why we'll see increases in like cardiovascular issues if a person's highly stressed and very sedentary, not moving enough. But what most people don't understand is that while it's prioritizing those cardiovascular functions, it is not prioritizing rest and digest functions, which includes that gut microbiome, because that's where you digest, right? So there's a paralysis that happens in the gut. It just kind of stops. It gets sluggish. It just kind of takes a break. It doesn't matter if you just ate or if you're eating later. Your gut is just sluggish. It's not really doing its job. What happens when stuff's not moving well, right? We have, first of all, a stagnant gut that's not moving well, that's not getting enough blood. We're then going to see some die-off of bacteria. And our best bacteria are sometimes more fragile. Okay, so we're going to lose some of that diversity. And then on top of that, it's kind of dying. If it sits too long without blood, it's going to kind of die in its own ways. And then what happens when we're eating food and the digestion's slow and sluggish? Okay, our nutrient absorption is going to be slow and sluggish. The elimination process is slow and sluggish. There's going to be more toxins and stuff that are allowed to just kind of fester and accumulate. Things like hormones that release through feces and stuff sometimes, or estrogen, can just be sitting in the body. This is not good. It's a stagnation of a system that we need to function. Okay, all of our systems need to function. They can't be stagnant for that long. It's fine if you need it for a minute. It's fine if you need to get away from something, a moment of stress and then recovery, right? The opposite of fight or flight is rest and digest. We should spend a majority of our time in rest and digest and way less in fight or flight. But the average person, kind of like the dysbiosis ratio of 80-20, is the opposite. They probably spend much more time in fight or flight and much less in rest and digest. And so chronic stress and trauma can lead to this dysregulation of the immune system. Stress hormones, obviously like cortisol, we said alter immune responses, potentially triggering or exacerbating autoimmune conditions, because that hormone relationship is just so big. That's why we see, do I have a thyroid disorder? Do I have anxiety? I may also probably have like a CPTSD background or childhood trauma or some junk. Maybe I went through divorce or a death or loss. And I'm dealing with all these things. And we'll often see a lot of those things hold hands and come together, at least throughout like a few year time period. The research on trauma and autoimmunity studies show higher prevalence of autoimmune disease among individuals with a history of trauma. It is like at least threefold, guys. I can't remember the exact statistics, but it's substantially higher. Trauma can lead to long-term changes in immune function and inflammatory responses. And like I said, we can be our body can be reliving a lot of things that maybe our brain kind of sets aside. It's like, I'm used to this. It's not a big deal. But the body's reliving it on a regular. The body's staying in a state of fight or flight. So, let me get to this. Sorry. So, one thing when it comes to the gut biome and autoimmunity, so obviously your gut is going to consist of things like bacteria, viruses, fungi, and other microorganisms, and each is essential for digestion and vitamin production and immune system education. So it educates your immune system. It's conducting. And in the immune system interaction, there's something called the GALT. It's the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, and it is a key player in immune function. And this is it's a tissue that kind of is around the gut. And a healthy microbiome trains the immune system to tolerate self-antigens and recognize harmful pathogens. But a dysbiosis refers to obviously the gut microbiome composition being in the negative. And this can trigger immune responses and inflammation and leading to confusing that whole system of microbes that's training the immune system. We confuse the immune system. And trauma can be physical, it could be injury, surgery. Not a lot of people think about this. If you've had a surgery, if you feel like you've gone through your life pretty good, and then you had a surgery, let's say you messed up your leg in an accident, and you had knee surgery or something like that. The potential of what this can offset, if you're dealing with issues after this, okay, this can be, you're dealing with the trauma of an injury, and then the trauma of a surgery, and then all of usually the drugs that we take when we go through surgery, so like antibiotics and the painkillers and all the things. And so this has a massive effect on the gut microbiome, and we can very much see it in psychological, ways that it'll come out. And it's not talked about enough, not to mention a lot of people, if they've had an injury, who knows, maybe they're laid up, they're, sat down. This can be a really perfect storm for a lot of mental health. And in my opinion, we need to talk about it way more in the medical profession, especially when people are going under the knife, things like that, is really set them up for success. Pregnant women, if they're having C-sections, let's set them up for success and not add, a lot of the common postpartum depression and stuff to everything else. The other things that exacerbate that gut and can really affect the brain. Trauma can obviously be psychological, emotional abuse, PTSD, and this can lead to immune system dysregulation. And the cortisol responses can lead to autoimmune flare-ups or onset sometimes too. They've shown that trauma, particularly childhood trauma, is linked to a higher risk of developing autoimmune disease, and it can cause long-lasting changes. So it's a complex interplay of genetic, environmental, and hormonal factors. And the gut microbiome significantly influences immune health and imbalances and can contribute to autoimmune diseases. So trauma can dysregulate the immune system and lead to all of this. So when we say which comes first, the chicken or the egg, this is why that brain-gut relationship is bidirectional and so important. It's so important in the realm of autoimmune disease, because there's so much that goes on in our experiences and our chronic stress and unresolved emotional things from our life that can affect our gut poorly. It's like the gut is really truly, I think, the first conductor of health, or the main conductor of health or lack of health. But it's influenced so much by the brain. And we know it influences the brain. As far as that gut-brain relationship, that gut is responsible for 80% of the communication between the two is uptake into the, it's communicating with the brain. 20% is brain to gut. but they both affect each other. So the gut is affected by our emotions and our thoughts and our trauma. And the gut also, when dysbiotic, affects our brain. It affects our hormonal production, our neurotransmitter production, so the adequate release of serotonin and dopamine and the things that keep our brain feeling good feelings and happy. It's implicated in a lot of addiction and stuff too, because a lot of addiction are people self-medicating these factors. And we look at things like addiction and the same is true of autoimmunity, and we see this huge correlation with, past life trauma and stress. Not in all cases, okay, at least not obviously in all cases, but in many, many, many cases. So we're like, okay, people are they're medicating trauma. They had trauma, so it makes sense. They're gonna, maybe go on and medicate with drugs, alcohol, or a substance. But what we don't understand is like the physiology behind what's really happening here. They've got trauma. That trauma is probably wrecking their gut. Their brain is now, and it's rewiring their brain, right? Because the brain's going to rewire for survival. It's going to rewire. If you grow up in a traumatic environment or you've been around things that are traumatic, then the brain says, it is in your best interest for me not to allow you to be naive, playful, easygoing, laid back, because I need to protect you. So I'm going to wire your brain. Your amygdala is probably going to become overdeveloped. That's your emotional response system. And you might become hypervigilant. You may be very intuitive, pick up on a lot of things. And you know what? Maybe I don't need so much. I don't need maybe as much prefrontal cortex action. So like, I don't really need you to like orchestrate and plan and study well and take information easily, because I need you to be a warrior. I need you to be someone who can escape danger and who can think fast and who can perceive threats all around you. Okay. This is the body working in your favor. It is, so for when you talk about childhood trauma and stuff, this is the body and brain and everything about you working for you. But the problem is that's fine for the moment to survive. It's fine to survive, but it is not fine to thrive. It is not fine to even live peacefully. And so a lot of us, we get into later places in life, if we haven't dealt with things like this, we will get multiple opportunities. We will get multiple opportunities in the form of pain. And often autoimmune conditions are the result of things like this not being resolved. And I'm not saying it's the only thing, right? It's stress, and stress comes in all forms. Maybe you're around a lot of chemical exposure, or you got a really high stress, unenjoyable job, and you just had a baby, and you had to be on medication, and you know what I mean? It's not just that like, oh, okay, you probably had a crappy childhood, but for those who it is, it's important to understand that trauma piece of it, to understand that, like I said, even with addiction and stuff like that, how this is really working is it likely jacks up the gut and rewires the brain for threat, which is, if a brain's rewired for threat, what's it going to keep communicating to the gut? Stress, 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 stress. It's going to be hyper able to jump into fight or flight. And this is not going to behoove our health, because this is going to put the gut in a constant state of paralysis, is it not? Right? And so then we're going to see I think that's where we see those microbial changes. If you have to look at the gut of somebody who's been through trauma, especially childhood trauma for a prolonged time and during developmental stages where they were getting a picture of what the world looked like. Trauma is hard at any time, but in childhood years, we're learning what the world means. And while we're learning what the world means, we learn that the world is a threat and the world is scary, then our brain is going to remember that, and our body is going to follow. And it is going to help us survive, but it is not going to help us live disease-free. And so comes a point where I believe we can heal, but our healing process has to be ours, and we've got to take it in our own hands. And so when that gut changes, because it's dealt with this constant change of evolution, this protection mechanism that it's lived in for so long, to get out of it, we have to rework it. We kind of have to unpack it backwards and understand how we got there. And not only in the way of obviously having good counselor, doing understanding brain and behavior and experiences, learning our own boundaries, coping mechanisms, soothing techniques, and then also paying attention to that gut. Let's build that gut back. Let's start cultivating an ecosystem that communicates healthy dopamine and serotonin. This is going to support us not self-medicating with illicit drugs or alcohol problems or things like that, because we're trying to feel something. We're trying to feel satiated or calm, or we're trying to feel up from depression, okay? Because we're seeing all these mental health, anxiety, depression, all of that. Well, these neurotransmitter functions aren't supporting a balanced brain function. And this is how emotional and environmental traumas and stresses affect the gut, that affect our mental health, that then affect a lot of our behaviors and the things that we see later in life, and all the statistics that we easily become. Okay, and I speak for myself too. This is definitely personal. And so to understand this, you guys, gives us hope that we can help unwire these things. And in states of autoimmunity, like I said, why it was important to touch on the trauma aspect is because there's a huge amount of us that have autoimmune conditions and high ACEs scores, which is adverse childhood experiences and trauma markers. And so then maybe we don't have to see it as trauma. Maybe it's just tough. But it doesn't mean that it wasn't a high stress on the body and that it didn't wire our brain different, which sets up our gut for thinking there's a lot of threat and prioritizing fight or flight way more than it should, which works against our health and causes our immune system to believe that there's always a fight and be overactive and get confused and attack things that it shouldn't, like our own tissues, specifically our thyroid, okay, especially for women. So keep this in the back of your mind, guys, that the way that we undo some of these things, okay, or to move somewhere with it, is to seek the full holistic process. So I like to start, if there's anything emotional you're going through, anything with mental health, you believe that maybe you have trauma in any area of your life at any point in your life, or you simply feel like somebody who doesn't know how to have a voice, doesn't communicate effectively, really feels indebted to people or like avoidant of people, or it's just too much, things like that. If you can acknowledge those things, get with the right counselor or therapist or something and start working on some of those pieces of you and understanding it in your mind. Start working to reprogram your mind and start working to nurture that gut microbiome in that body. We want to move this body healthy. We want to nurture that gut microbiome. We want to build a community and an ecosystem in there that supports our brain function, that supports, that has anti-inflammatory effects, that's soothing. Because if it's anti-inflammatory, that's going to hold back. Even if you have an autoimmune condition, you're going to be much more apt to function better, have less flare-ups, have less severity of all of that, if you can get your gut in a really great state and really nurture that. And your body will. I mean, it's more work, but this was your body's warning mechanism. These are multiple warning mechanisms from our body. Is when we start to suffer, it says, I have to heal. I have a place where is not healed. Okay, you've been operating like this. It's a survival mechanism, but it's not healed. Okay, we're not trying to band-aid the wound here. We're not trying to just cover it up. We actually need it to get better. It needs to be cleaned out, and it needs to be well taken care of now. And we have the opportunity to do that, and we can do that through the gut-brain relationship.